Hello everyone and welcome to our course, Learning Simple Augmented Reality from Scratch in the Unreal Engine 5. In this course, we're going to learn how to build out an augmented reality project from scratch in Unreal. We're going to be setting up our project, building out a level, building out some simple blueprints to perform augmented reality. In this case, the augmented reality is going to be to detect geometries in our world via a phone camera. So we're going to learn how to set up the augmented reality and also how to test that with a phone camera. So how we can set up our Unreal project and our phone to test out our project. Let's talk about what you will need to take this course. All right, you are going to need, first of all, an Epic Games account. This is completely free to create, and you need that in order to install the application Epic Games Launcher to your computer. And via the Epic Games Launcher, you can install a version of the Unreal Engine. All of these are completely free. We recommend installing Unreal Engine 5.0 Early Access because that is the version that we are using in this course, but you can use any version of Unreal Engine 5. As well, you're going to need a Windows computer because Unreal runs slowly even on M1 Macs with a Windows virtual machine. If you are going to be testing out your application on an iOS phone like an iPhone, then it's recommended to use a Mac. But for starting out the building of your project, it's recommended to use a Windows computer. This is highly recommended, and then only if you want to then later deploy your project for iOS, you can then use a Mac to build the project for iOS. But for actually building out the project, not packaging it for iOS, it's recommended to use a Windows computer. As well, you're going to need Android Studio 4.0. We're going to show you how you can install that later on in this course when we get there. The reason you need this is to launch an Unreal project on an Android device. So we are going to be showing you how to build out a project in Unreal and then testing it on an Android device because we need a device camera in order to actually render at the world around us and then render augmented reality on top of that real world. Android Studio 4.0 is required to install the Android SDK, NDK, and JDK for the Unreal Engine. And you have to make sure you're using the correct version of Android Studio for your version of Unreal. And for Unreal 5, that is Android Studio 4.0. You'll learn how to install it later on in this course. And this is only for deploying the project on an Android phone. For deploying the project on an iOS device, like an iPhone, then it's recommended to use a Mac computer to package the project for iOS. But you can still start off by building it on a Windows computer. You will also need a device to actually test the augmented reality project. You need an Android device with ARM version 64. An iOS device is not recommended without a Mac. So you do have to make sure your Android device is ARM version 64, nothing less. You can't use ARM version 32 or ARM version 7. That is too low of an Android device version, and Unreal 5 no longer supports that version of Android devices for testing. And we'll show you when we get there how you can check what version of ARM your phone actually is. We'll show you later on in this course. As well, all of the source files are provided at the end of each section. You just have to extract all the zip files and then open the project via the Epic Games Launcher. You don't want to open it directly via your folder because then that can cause it to not build properly. So the Epic Games Launcher is very useful for installing Unreal and also opening projects, and you can also download assets from the Unreal Marketplace and more. We're going to be using blueprints to write our app functionality. Blueprints are a visual scripting language that are an alternative to C++. In Unreal, you can either build projects and write their game functionality in Blueprints or in C++. If you're working long-term in Unreal, then it's good to know both of them. But for beginners just starting out, Blueprints are going to be a lot easier to build and debug. And Blueprints still follow the same concepts of programming, like they still use loops and variables, functions, classes. So it's a great way to learn programming as a beginner. In terms of experience, it is recommended to have Unreal experience before taking this course, because we're not going to be breaking down every little thing about Unreal. So if you don't have any Unreal experience, it's highly recommended to watch our Unreal introductory course, Introducing Unreal 5. But you can just jump in if you don't have experience. Perhaps if you come from a different game engine or a different software, you will be able to follow along with Unreal, but it will be harder if this is your first time ever opening Unreal. And that is this course introduction, what you will need to take this course. Join me coming up next. We'll talk about how to install Unreal, and then we will start building out our augmented reality project. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we're going to do an introduction to what is Unreal Engine 5 in the first place. We'll talk about in general what is Unreal, and then specifically some features of Unreal 5. Unreal is a software for building virtual worlds, visualizations, and entertainment. It's used across many industries like game development, but also in the automotive industry for designing cars. It's used as well in film for visual effects, and as well it's used in architecture for designing buildings and much more. It can also be used for augmented reality, virtual reality, and machine learning, because with Unreal you can really quickly create worlds that are realistic. They don't have to be hyper realistic, but they can be, and therefore you can really quickly generate data sets, whether that's for being able to take a picture of an image from 1,000 different angles, so that later you can use those data sets for detection, or whether that's designing tracks for self-driving cars to train in a realistic like road. There are lots of possibilities of what you can build with Unreal. It is an open and advanced real-time 3D creation tool. It's also completely free, so anyone can just download Unreal and start building something with it. There's a large active community of developers and designers and in general creators. So there's a lot of support online if you have questions, if you have problems. Oftentimes, most likely someone has come across the same problem that you have or is building something that you could find interesting. Unreal was created by the company Epic Games, who also built the games Fortnite and Infinity Blade. So there's quite a lot of production and team behind building the Unreal Engine itself, and it's still constantly being developed and improved. Unreal supports pipeline integration, animation, simulation, and effects, integrating media, building worlds, gameplay, as well Hollywood quality rendering, lighting, and materials, virtual production, and developer tools. There is a whole suite of tools for you to use, and you can learn more at unrealengine.com. We're going to be using Unreal Engine 5 Early Access. Unreal Engine 5 is the latest version of Unreal. It has many new key features and improvements, such as a new design of the editor that's more user-friendly, and also very interesting Nanite and Lumen technologies. Nanite is a virtualized micropolygon system that allows you to build your meshes, your objects with huge amounts of geometric detail. So you can have millions of polygons in super high quality source assets while still having a real-time frame rate. And Unreal is used to build projects all the way from huge commercial games to indie games to huge films, blockbuster films, and other industries as well. Nanite, as of Unreal 5 is available for use, and it allows you to have super high quality polygons inside of your objects. And the great thing about Nanite is that if you're zoomed out, you might not necessarily want to have a high level of detail, and Nanite can actually intelligently process how much detail you need. So if you're zoomed out, you won't have to process all of those micro details, but if you're really zoomed in, you will process those details. As well as of Unreal 5, there is now the Lumen technology, which allows for dynamic illumination. So you no longer have to author your light map UVs and bake your light maps. Lighting is a lot more dynamic and adaptive on the fly. And this is huge because before, lighting was a lot of work to set up in any kind of environment. But with Lumen, lighting is dynamic. There are many other features to Unreal 5 as well. Nanite and Lumen are the two big highlights. To learn more, just go to epicgames.com and read more about their Unreal Engine 5 features. Unreal 5 is quite exciting. It's great for anyone from a beginner to game development to someone who's advanced in game development to start off building out a project. So it's great regardless of where you are in your game development journey. You can build something with Unreal. Whether you want to build a low poly indie game or you want to build a more high quality realistic game, you can do it quickly with Unreal. And not only games, but of course other industries as well. For this course, we're focused on game development. And as well, with Unreal, you can also use its templates for building games, which is a great way to learn and also to build projects quickly. We're going to be learning throughout our series of courses on Unreal. We're going to learn how to build projects from scratch and also how to put to use templates, because with templates, you can build out your projects really quickly. And without templates, you can really learn from the ground up how to use Unreal. Unreal is used at many companies across lots of industries like the automotive industry, the film industry, of course, the game development industry. So it's a great tool to add to your tool belt, being able to use this powerful software. So join me coming up in our next lecture. We will talk about how to install Unreal. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we're going to learn how to install the Unreal 5 engine. First, you want to go to unrealengine.com/English-US/download. Okay, so this is the downloads page for the Unreal Engine. Here you have two different licensing options. You have publishing license and a creator's license. Okay, for the publishing license, after the first $1 million in revenue that your product makes, then you have to pay a 5% royalty. For the creator's license, there are no royalties. However, for the creator's license, you then wouldn't get for game development. For publishing a game, choose the publishing license. But for just learning or for internal and free projects, custom applications, or linear content, such as film or TV, you can choose the creator's license, which doesn't have any royalties. Okay, then you just click this button, download now, and this is going to prompt you to sign up or log into an Epic Games account. Right, so you can sign up for an Epic Games account. It's completely free. And that will allow you to download that Epic Games launcher. So this application is going to be called the Epic Games Launcher, and once you have it installed, open it up. Here it is on my computer. I have the Epic Games application now open. All right, and next up, in order to get Unreal Engine 5, we have to go into this tab UE5. And we have to download the early access version of this engine. Okay, so then in the top right hand corner, you'll have this button that says you can launch the engine. But you'll only get this button in the top right hand corner if you have downloaded the Unreal Engine 5. It takes about an hour or more to download depending on your computer's speed. There's also a prompt for UE4, Unreal Engine 4. And if you are finding yourself clicking this button, UE5, download early access, and if you find that nothing happens when you click that, in that case, go to UE4 and start a download of UE4, Unreal Engine 4, and then just pause the download and start a download of UE5 again. Because I encountered this problem where I tried to click download early access, but nothing was happening. And that was because I didn't have any version of Unreal Engine in my library at all. But if you have a version of Unreal Engine 4, even if it's not even downloaded, if it's just partially downloaded, then come back and you can download early access. Because Unreal Engine 5 is an early access version as of now, it means that there can be some bugs and issues like that. All right, once you have installed Unreal Engine 5, you can press the button in the top right-hand corner or inside of your library to launch the engine. All right, and this is going to allow you to then select what kind of project you want to create. The first time that you launch a project via Unreal Engine, it can take some time for the engine to set itself up. For example, for compiling its shaders when you're making a new project. So just be patient when you're running UE5 for the first time. But then once you have started building projects with it, it will launch faster each time. Okay, here we can see we have different tabs for our recent projects, games templates, film, video, and live events templates, architecture, engineering, and construction templates, and automotive product design and manufacturing templates, the four main industries that Unreal is used for. And that is how you can install Unreal Engine 5. If you have any other issues installing Unreal 5, just search them up via a search engine or look into the Unreal Engine 5 forums and look up your issue there. Speaking of which, coming up next, we're going to talk about how to debug Unreal, what to do if you encounter any problems or you have a question or an error that pops up. So join me in our next lecture. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. Before we get started building our Unreal project, we're going to talk in this lecture quickly about how to debug Unreal, what to do if you have a question or a problem or an error. Because Unreal has been around for a while and it has a large active community, there are lots of people out there who have asked questions or who answer questions on the web. Because more often than not, usually, if you have a question, it has likely been asked before on the web. All right, so first, any questions that you have, sometimes they may just come up if something isn't working, or other times you might get an error message in the log. So to see all of your error messages, just go to the Window tab in the header of any Unreal project, and then there go into the log section, and you can open up the device output log, the message log, or the output log, and you can see exactly what happened at every step of the project's launching or even creation, and you can see what might have caused an issue. Then once you know your problem, you know your error message, or you know what your problem is, you can search it up via a search engine. There are many answers on Stack Overflow or Unreal forums. As well, you can join a Discord server for Unreal 5. And on top of that, Unreal 5 has an early access forum specifically for questions about UE5 early access, which you can go to by visiting forums.unrealengine.com and then using the Unreal Engine 5 early access tag. You can see if anyone is encountering the same problem as you are with your exact version of Unreal, whatever version that may be that you're using. For example, Unreal Engine 5 early access. All right, so that is how you can debug and solve problems in Unreal. Every problem is solvable with enough time. With enough searching, you will find an answer to your question, so don't give up. Now that we have introduced Unreal, join me coming up in our next section where we're going to start building out our project. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we are going to start building out our augmented reality project from scratch. So launch the Unreal 5 engine and we'll get started. Select the section here, Games, and we're going to use a blank template, which means a clean, empty project with no code. All right, there are templates such as Handheld AR, which allows you to have a starting point for building AR applications. This has runtime logic for turning on AR mode, as well as detecting planes and detecting hits and light estimation. So you can use this template to get started as well, but we are going to be launching our project from scratch. So that way we have an understanding of how augmented reality works in Unreal from the ground up. All right, so let's get started. We'll select blank. Then here, we're going to select the project defaults. We want to select blueprint, and we don't need any starter content. Let me just zoom out here so you can see these options. All right, here we go. I've zoomed out, and now you can see the target platform is going to be mobile. The quality preset is maximum, and the starter content we can remove. We don't need any starter content for this project, but if you want to have some pre-made assets, you can include starter content. It doesn't matter. For this specific project, we don't need starter content because we're just going to be building an extremely basic augmented reality project that anyone can build. Make sure you do have the blueprint mode enabled because we're going to be writing some small scripts with visual scripting, so with blueprints. Then select a directory for your project in the bottom left-hand corner. Choose the location where you're going to save the project. And in the bottom right-hand corner, give your project a name, for example, Augmented Reality. Then press the Create button, and that is going to launch the Unreal Editor. Here we go. We have the Unreal Editor. You can dismiss the new plugins and then hit Update to update your project. All right, and in the default template, we just have here your ground. And because we didn't include any starter content, we don't have any chairs or table. If you included starter content, you would see some of those assets built by Unreal right here in the viewport. Okay, you can press Control S to save this map. You can just call this our map 1 in our content folder. Or you can also right click and here create a new folder called our levels folder or maps, and you can store all of your maps in this subfolder just to stay organized. Then press save, okay, and then you can go to file and save all, or use Control-Shift-S to save all of the levels and assets that need to be saved. All right, and here is our project created. Our blank project. You can see all the content by going to the World Outliner window, such as fog, the floor, lights, player starting position, and the sky. If you don't see the World Outliner window, just go to the header and select Window, and then choose World Outliner. Here you can choose other windows as well, like the Content Browser, Details, Viewports, Levels, and World Settings are the most commonly used. In the Details tab, we see information about each of the objects that we click on. Then in the Content Browser, we just have all of the content in our project, which is augmented reality. You can drag around these windows if you like, place them anywhere that you want. For me, I like to have my viewport on the left and all my other tabs on the right. Commonly, you also see the Content Browser beside the viewport as well, like this. Or you can pop out the Content Browser completely as well when needed. So that way you can easily drag objects into the game. So feel free to move around the windows wherever you like. That won't affect your game. All right, and now that we have our project created, we are going to get started implementing augmented reality. So join me in our next section. We'll start by adjusting the settings and plugins of this project so that we can enable augmented reality. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In the previous section, we built a new Unreal project, and in this section, we're going to implement augmented reality into the blank project from scratch. This will allow you to understand how augmented reality works from the ground up in Unreal. So join me back in our project, and we're going to begin by adjusting the settings and plugins for augmented reality. And note that I have increased the text size of my display, so that's why my display looks a little bit more smushed, but I still have all of my tools here on the right. I can still press play and choose my platforms. Okay, so I'm going to test out the game by pressing play, and we just have a regular blank Unreal level here with the floor. I'll press escape to exit the play mode. All right, next let's go into the settings tab, and I'm going to select here project settings. Then I am going to select from here my Android project settings. So I'll just scroll down until I get into platforms, and I'm going to select Android. Okay, here I need to configure the project for the Android platform because I'm going to be showing you how you can test out your project on an Android phone. You can also build the project for an iOS phone, but it's recommended to test out on Android. If you do have a Mac, it's a lot easier to test out for iOS, but if you just have a Windows computer, then it's harder to test out on an iOS phone. It's recommended if you're going to test on an iOS phone that you use a Mac for that. So we are going to be testing on Android because we're running Unreal on Windows. All right, here under platforms, Android, we are going to first select to configure the project for the Android platform. So select this button, configure now. Okay, now our platform files are writable. Next, we're going to select an Android package name. Okay, here you can change this from com.yourcompany.project to instead something that is more unique to yourself. So for example, we'll do com.mammothinteractive.project. And this project is going to be replaced with your project name. Okay, then you can scroll down here and look at all the other settings that are available. For example, if you want to enable for Google Play, then you also have to configure for the Google Play services. As well, for testing, note that there are a lot of conditions for testing. For example, you have to make sure that you have a phone that supports ARM64. All right, so if your phone does not support ARM64, you'll notice here you actually won't be able to test it on that phone. And we'll talk more about that when we get to testing out the project and talking about how to launch the project on a phone. Okay, next you can also set the minimum SDK version here, and as well the target SDK version. And don't set this lower to 19. Often you'll also find these adjusting by themselves during the build. We want at least an SDK of 21 for minimum. Next, let's set the orientation. Okay, so here, if you scroll down to orientation, you have sensor landscape selected. That is the one you want to choose. So make sure you do have sensor, could be sensor portrait or sensor landscape or just sensor itself. As long as it's one of the centers, okay, you can either choose sensor portrait, sensor landscape, sensor, or full sensor, which means you can use any orientation. And that is going to allow us to more easily have a user interface that works smoother because we're working with augmented reality. So that's why we want sensor. This will use the type of orientation based on the device orientation sensor. Okay, now that we've set our orientation, let's go into our input settings. So I'm going to scroll up to here, the engine section, and select input. Here, we are going to set our default touch interface. All right, so this will allow you to actually touch your screen. Now for our project, we're not going to have any touching of the screen, so let's just go ahead and clear this. So just click on any default touch interface option already selected and hit clear to make it none. That way we won't be able to touch or interact with the screen. We'll just have a camera view, and that's not required. For other projects, you can enable a touch interface. Okay, there's this touch interface setup. So that way you can actually enable user input from the phone via touch. But in our case, we're not going to have any interaction via the user themselves, except they're just going to be able to move their camera around. But for other more complicated augmented reality projects, then yes, you could implement touch. As well, next, let's go into our plugins. So I'm going to close project settings, and just make sure you close it on the left-hand side. If you click the close button on the top right-hand side, you're actually closing your whole project. Okay, so I'm going to close my project settings, and then I'm going to go back into settings in the top right-hand corner and select plugins this time. Okay, here I need to enable an augmented reality plugin. Okay, so whether that's for iOS or for Android, you have to enable an AR plugin. So Apple AR Kit would be for iOS, but for our Android phones, it's going to be AR Core. Okay, so we need to here enable this plugin that supports Google's AR platform. There's also Google AR Core Services, which provides functionality in Google cross-platform AR Core services. But for testing on a phone, we only need this Google AR Core. So select here, Enabled, to enable this plugin. All right, now for the plugin changes to take effect, you have to restart your Unreal Editor. So just go ahead and press Restart Now in the bottom right-hand corner. All right, and my editor has restarted after just a few seconds. So then I can type in Google AR Core again, and you'll see it's now enabled, which means we can close the plugins window. And we can also save all. All right, so those are the settings we needed. Now, there's also going to be more project settings that we'll work on later. We are going to later on go into Platforms Android SDK, and we're going to specify the Android SDK that we're using. I'll show you exactly how to set these up, because by default on your project, you won't actually have these filled in. These will be empty. But in my case, I have them set up because Unreal saved them from a previous project. So later on, we do have to also set up Android SDK, and I'll show you how we do that. Because if we don't set up Android SDK, we can't actually run the project on an Android phone. All right, so we can close our project settings, and that's it for the setup for now. So join me in our next lecture where we're going to build a new empty level for augmented reality. Because yes, we do have a level right now, but it has some content and it has a camera and lights. But for augmented reality, we don't want to use this virtual world. We want to actually be able to grab the real world around us via the device's camera. So in the next lecture, we'll make a level specifically for that. Join me in the next lecture. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we're going to build a new level or map for our game. Currently in levels, we have map 1, which is this default map. And this has a bunch of default objects that were created whenever we create a project in Unreal that is a blank project. Now, next up, we're going to create a new map or level that doesn't have any content, because instead of rendering a world as we have now, we want the world to be rendered using our phone camera. All right, so to make a new empty level, we can hit Control-N, or we can go to File and select New Level. And here you can see the keyboard shortcut. Okay, so I'm going to select New Level. Then from here, I'm going to select Empty Level, not Default. Okay, and there we go. Now we can see we have in our viewport just a black screen, and in our world outliner, we don't have any content in the level. Now let's save this level by hitting Control-S, and make sure you save it in your levels folder just to stay organized. We are going to call this our blank level. Then hit Enter or Save. All right, and there we go. Now we have our blank level, and this is the level that we are going to use in order to actually render our augmented reality scene. Okay, so now in our content browser, we have blank level, and we can also look in the world outliner, and we can see we have no content inside of this level. Next up, we are going to make our first blueprint a game mode blueprint. That way we can specify which pawn and which player controller we want to use for augmented reality. So instead of using the default player from our map 1, instead of using this level, we're going to set it up so that our main level is the blank level. So join me in our next lecture where we'll continue our project. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In the previous lecture, we built out a new blank level, so that way we can use our phone's camera in order to generate the environment instead of having this virtual environment made. Next up, we're going to build our first blueprint. Okay, we are going to need a game mode blueprint, so that way we can specify what has to be the default pawn and what is going to be the default player controller, instead of using what is already set in our default settings whenever we create a new project. Instead, we're going to override those and create our own custom blueprints. All right, so let's go into our content browser, and I am going to create a new folder here. So I'm going to click add, or you can right click as well, and let's select new folder. And here I'm going to call this my blueprints folder to stay organized. Double click on that to enter it. Then let's create our first blueprint. Okay, so I'm going to select add here and select blueprint class. Okay, then I'm going to create a new game mode base. This is going to be our blueprint for our game mode. I'm going to call this our game mode and then hit enter. Okay, so here we go. We have now our game mode. We could also call this our custom game mode if you want to. So you can call this game mode, custom game mode, just to differentiate it from the others, or augmented reality game mode as well. Okay, now let's double click on that blueprint to open it. And I'm going to drag that window right beside our other windows. Then in the details tab, you can see different properties of this game mode. Most notably, the classes. Okay, so here we want to change the default pawn class to be our own custom pawn. And as well, the player controller class we want to set to be our own custom player controller. So let's go back to our content browser and let's create a couple more blueprints for those. All right, so I'm going to here select add and then blueprint class. And let's start by making a pawn. And I'm going to call this our AR pawn and hit enter. Okay, then if I go back into my custom game mode, I'm going to set my default pawn here. And I'm going to set it to my custom AR pawn that I just created. All right, then let's compile and save the blueprint. And let's also create a player controller for augmented reality. So I'm going to select add blueprint class. The type is going to be player controller. This is an actor responsible for controlling a pawn. And then I'm going to call this my AR player controller and hit enter. Okay, then back in my custom game mode, I'm going to set my player controller class to the AR player controller. Okay, so this way, I'm now going to be using my custom pawn and my custom player controller in a new game mode instead of using the defaults. Make sure you save everything with File, Save All, or Control-Shift-S. Now, we've set the player controller class and the default pawn class, but how do we actually specify that this game mode is the one that we want the game to use instead of its default? Well, for that, we are going to go into our Settings tab in the top left-hand corner. Here, we're then going to go into our project settings. In our project settings, we need to find our modes. So search up modes here, and you'll be taken to maps and modes. but you'll only be shown the default modes here because we searched for modes and not maps. Okay, and here we are going to change our default game mode. Instead of using game mode base, which is the default used whenever you create a blank Unreal project, instead I'm going to use our custom game mode that we just created. Okay, so make sure you set that, otherwise your game mode won't actually be recognized. Now in the drop down here, selected game mode, this refers to that default game mode that we selected, and you have to make sure that you have the default pawn class and the player controller class correctly set. Make sure these are no longer just the default, but that they're actually your custom AR pawn and AR pawn player controller, which are those two blueprints that we just created together. Okay, as well, I want to change my default map, so I'm going to go into my maps. All right, here we go, and we need to change our editor startup map and the game default map to our blank level. Okay, so I'm going to select your editor startup map, and I'm going to select blank level. As same for game default map, I'm going to select blank level. If we leave it as the default ones, then we actually will be using those other maps instead of our blank level. And we don't want that. We want to make sure we're using the blank level because that will allow us to use our phone's camera to render the world. All right, so make sure you set both modes and maps. And once you've done all that, we are good with our game mode blueprint. Next up, we are going to fill in some content into our pawn blueprint. Okay, because the pawn is what's going to actually contain our augmented reality functionality. So in our next lecture, we're going to implement the event graph of this AR pawn, and we're going to actually have it do some augmented reality. For example, this could be detecting planes, this could be putting an object into the world, this could be registering touch if you wanted to include that. This could be whatever augmented reality you want to implement in your project. In our case, we're going to be detecting geometries, and we're going to be doing that in this pawn blueprint. So join me in our next lecture where we will build out our blueprint. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In the previous lecture, we set up our blueprints, our game mode, pawn, and player controller. And in this lecture, we're going to build out our blueprint for the pawn. This will be the blueprint that does the augmented reality functionality. In our case, that is going to be to detect geometries inside of the world. And the world will be whatever is being rendered by the phone camera or whatever device you're using. All right, let's open up our pawn blueprint here, and I'm going to go into the components. You can see all we have by default is just a default scene root, but I'm going to add a camera component to this blueprint. So I'll press add, and here I want to search for a camera. Okay, and I'm going to select that. There we go. Now we have a camera in the viewport. Let's compile and save all of this. All right, next let's open up the event graph. Here we're going to get started building out our functionality. I'm going to just delete event actor begin overlap for now. We won't need that one to get started. And we will need event begin play because this node is going to run whenever the game starts. So let me just drag this around. Let me first compile and save, and then I can drag around. There we go. So off of begin play, the first thing we want to do is we want to immediately start an augmented reality session as soon as the application or the game begins. So I'm going to drag off here a new executable node, and I'm going to call the function start AR session. Okay, this is under the section for augmented reality. Hit enter, and now we have here that function. You can see we're being prompted to create a new session configuration object. This describes the tracking method to use, what kind of geometry to detect in the world, etc. If you search for the asset, currently we have none. That's because a session config this is a session configuration and it is a data class. So we have to create our own data asset that is an augmented reality session configuration. Okay, so to do that, let's compile and save everything, and then let's go back into our blueprints folder in our content browser. Here we are going to create a new data asset. All right, so I'm going to just select add, and then I want to go into miscellaneous, and here I am going to choose AR, or not AR, but rather data asset. There we go. And mine's just flickering because I'm zoomed in quite a bit. But here we go. We have pick data asset class. Okay, and here I want to search for AR session config. There it is. So select that one. And notice it's a data asset, and then press select. Okay, so now we have here our data asset created. Let's just call this our D_session config. This is just the naming convention. Typically you'll put a D underscore in front of the session configuration. Okay, then let's go back into the blueprint for our augmented reality pawn. And now we can actually fill in this argument. We can click on select asset, and we can choose that data asset that we just created. All right, then I'm going to now be able to look around the world and scan the world to see if there is a geometry. And if there is, then we can show it on the phone or the device. All right, so for that, we're going to go into our other node, which is the event tick. Okay, so I'm just going to drag that a little bit up. Event tick, this is the node that is going to run every frame of the game. So that's quite often. So we're going to continuously be detecting geometries in the world every frame of the game. That is quite a lot of detection. You could definitely reduce the amount of detection you're doing. You don't have to detect every tick, but for our simple project, we can just detect every tick. All right, so off of this node, I'm going to drag an executable action, and I'm going to select here. In this case, I'm going to look for get all geometries. Under here, augmented reality, we're calling this function get all AR geometries. So we're searching for all the geometries in the world being whatever the device's camera is showing, whatever that device's camera is detecting. All right, then I'm going to make a for each loop that's going to loop through all of the geometries found, because I want to go through all the geometries and show them on the phone. So I'm going to drag this executable node off, and here I'm going to search for each loop. Right, there we go, there it is, and select that. And the array is whatever we found in those geometries. So we're going to grab the return value of the function get all AR geometries and pass it to the array of the for each loop. So that means we are looping through all of those geometries and performing some action for each geometry. Notice that I had to connect it via the executable node, and I had to pass in the parameter. If you leave out one of these two, then the for each loop won't perform accurately. Okay, so what do we want to happen at each of the geometries? For each of the geometries found, we can drag off this array element to perform some action. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the tracked geometry. So I'll drag off this node, and I'm going to search for draw tracked geometry. There we go. It's under debug for augmented reality. There we go. So we can draw whatever geometry was tracked, which means it will just outline it. So you'll be looking through your device's camera, and you'll see whatever the camera is picking up, whatever the camera is rendering, and then on top of that, it will also draw whatever geometry it's detected. And those will be as just two-dimensional shapes. All right, so there we go. We've called this function debug draw tracked geometry. Make sure you also pass in here the loop body. Okay, so we want to plug in from the loop body to this debug draw tracked geometry. All right, and we can also expand the draw tracked geometry to see some finer details. For example, you can change the color of the tracked geometry. as well as the outline thickness and how long you want it to persist for on the screen. Okay, so we can just keep the persistence very small just because we are running this every tick already. Okay, and this is the basic setup for our pawn. We're going to first begin a new augmented reality session, and then for every frame of the game, we're going to be searching for all of the geometries that the augmented reality session detected. And for each of those geometries that it detects around you, it's going to draw them. So it's just going to outline whatever geometries it finds in your camera. All right, now we can compile and save all of this. And next up, you can just set up your project for your phone, and you can already test this out. So you can't test it out without a phone. If you just go to the play right now, you'll see that you'll be attempting to start an AR session, but there is no AR plugin configured. So what we have to do is we have to actually install Android Studio and set up your Android phone for debugging, and then add the Android SDK to Unreal, as well as the NDK and Java. And then once you have your project set up for testing on your Android phone, then you can actually run the project, and you'll be able to see the app will run on your phone, and it will access your camera, and then you can see your world through your camera, of course. But then on top of that, the pawn blueprint will also be drawing on top of any geometries it finds. It will outline them. Okay, so join me. Coming up next, I'm going to show you how you can set up your Android phone for testing. You can also test on iOS, but for that, it is recommended to have a Mac because it's slightly more complicated to set up your phone and your testing on iOS. As well, you can use an Unreal 5 turnkey to test out your applications really quickly on Android and also on desktop. As of Unreal 5 Early Access, there is beta support for turnkey on Android phones. So if you do have turnkey set up already, then feel free to use that. It makes the setup for testing on phones faster, for Android at least. As of Unreal 5 Early Access, there's no iOS support for that, but there will be in the future. All right, so you can also test on desktop if you do have a webcam. You just have to make sure that you have that set up as your device that you're running it on. Okay, so you would go into Play here, and you would select whatever desktop you have. The device has to have a camera. So most augmented reality applications are run on the phone, so I'm going to show you how you can set it up with a phone. That being an Android phone, I'm going to show you how you can set it up from scratch just by installing Android Studio and setting up your phone and adding the SDK to Unreal. If you do have turnkey, then it does make the process a lot faster, but not everyone has turnkey set up. So if you don't have turnkey set up, I'm going to show you how to do it from scratch. So join me in our next section. We're going to learn how to set up an Android phone for testing out an Unreal project. If you already know how to set up your projects for testing on your phone, then you can just go ahead and immediately test out this project already. But if you've never tested out a project on an Android phone before, then I will walk you through all the steps in the next section. So join me over there. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this section, we're going to show you how you can test out your Unreal project on an Android device. The first step is going to be to install Android Studio to your computer. So navigate to this website, developer.android.com/studio/archive. This allows you to select the exact version of Android Studio that you want to download. All right, so here we're going to scroll down and accept the terms and conditions. Okay, so I'm going to select I agree to the terms. And then you'll have this option of all these versions of Android Studio that you can choose from. Okay, so we're in the download archives. The reason we want the download archives is because for Unreal 5, we need to use Android Studio 4.0. So I'm going to just scroll down until we get to Android Studio 4.0. There we go. We're just going to use this regular version released on May 28th, 2020. That's for Unreal Engine 5 Early Access. With later versions of Unreal 5, the version of Android Studio could increase. So you do want to check on the Unreal site what is the version of Android Studio compatible with your version of Unreal. In this case, for Unreal 5 Early Access, we're using Android Studio 4.0. Okay, then here we're going to download the correct installer for our computer. Okay, so here we have an installer for Windows, Chrome, Mac. We also have zip files if you prefer to install that way. In my case, I'm using a Windows computer, so I'm selecting this Windows exe file. If you were on a Mac, you would use the DMG file. Okay, so I'm going to click on this exe file, and then I am going to save the file. This will save the executable file for Android Studio. So press OK and give it a few minutes to download. Okay, and once that has installed, you can then open up that exe file. All right, here, if you already have a version of Android Studio installed, you can uninstall the older version. So I'm going to select yes to do that. And then just go through the setup for installing Android Studio. So press next. Here we have options for components that we want to select. You can leave the default components enabled. Here we can then set the Android Studio installation location. I recommend using this default location and press next. Then we can choose a start menu folder. Android Studio is fine. Press install. And then wait a few moments for Android Studio to install. Once that is completed, press next and make sure you have Start Android Studio selected because we have to configure Android Studio when we open it for the first time, and press Finish. Because we had that checkbox selected, Android Studio will immediately start running, and make sure you have version 4.0. Okay, now when we first install Android Studio, we have to configure it. All right, so here, now if you've never had Android Studio before, then you will have to configure the Android Studio settings. Make sure you don't import the Android Studio settings from anywhere. And as well, make sure that you specifically install the correct version of Android Studio, that you don't install any update. And as well, make sure that when you are actually verifying the settings that you are using the default SDK path, not any other path. Otherwise, later on, you won't be able to find the necessary files. And you'll also often be prompted to restart your computer to finalize the Android Studio installation. Okay, so once we've installed Android Studio, next up, we are going to set up the Android NDK. And after that, we're going to add the Android SDK, NDK, and Java to Unreal, and then set up our phone for testing. So join me in our next lecture where we will set up the Android NDK. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In the previous lecture, we installed Android Studio, and next up, we need to set up the Android NDK. So go into your directory, your main computer directory, and navigate to Program Files. Next up, here we're going to select Epic Games, and we have different options for Unreal depending on which versions of Unreal you have on your computer. We want to specifically go into UE5 Early Access. That is the version that we're currently using for our project. Then we're going to go into Engine and select Extras and then Android. And you can also just go into this path directly just by double-clicking inside of your search bar here, your directory path, and typing in this path. All right, and here you'll notice we have different files. We want to run the setup Android script here. So we want to use the one appropriate for our operating system. BAT for Windows, Command for Mac, and then SH for Linux. So I'm going to use BAT Windows batch file. All right, so I'm just going to double click on that, and that will open up my terminal here, my exe file. All right, press any key to continue. All right, there we go. I just pressed enter. And oftentimes it'll also ask you to press Y to accept, Y for yes, and then enter to accept, and then any key to dismiss. In my case, all I had to do was just double click this and open it and just say everything, just because I've already run this script before. But if you're running this for the first time, you'll often have to press Y for yes and then enter to accept, and then any key to dismiss. And then also, if this is your first time with installing this NDK and running it, you have to restart your computer for the changes to actually take effect. So what this script does is it downloads and installs the required version of Android NDK for our version of Android Studio. Okay, so we have to make sure we have the correct version of Android NDK to match the Android SDK. All right, and after this has run, you can then go into your app data and you'll actually be able to see a folder containing your required NDK version. Okay, so for that, we can go into our main directory again. This time go into users and select your username. Mine is Glitty. And then we're going to go into our app data. But notice here, you actually don't see app data shown up because it's actually a hidden folder. So instead, we can actually just directly access the folder by going into /. And then here, I'm going to go into app data and hit enter. Okay, so we can actually see that hidden folder. Then we're going to go into local and then select Android, and we have SDK and we have NDK. And if you were able to properly run that script, then you'll see versions of the NDK for you to use. All right, and now if you don't see this, you probably have to restart your computer. Also, make sure that script that we ran previously, that exe script that we just ran, make sure you didn't get any error messages. It has to run successfully. Common error messages are, for example, that your repositories.cfg file cannot be loaded, or that your LLDB file cannot be loaded. And we can talk about different solutions for those coming up in the next lecture, for those two common errors that can occur whenever you run that script. But once you have the script successfully running, then you can restart your computer and you will be able to see this NDK version. If you see these NDK folders inside of this path, then you know you successfully installed the NDK. So join me in our next lecture. We'll talk about potential issues with running this script, and then we'll be able to add Android to our Unreal project. I will see you in the next lecture. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In the previous lecture, I showed you how to run the Android NDK script, but before we move on, I want to tell you about a couple potential issues that could come up when you run an Android NDK script. Starting with an error message you could get that says repositories.cfg cannot be loaded. This is a common error message that can appear, and the solution is to navigate to or create the folder where it's expected, which is usually in users/your username .android/repositories. So you either have to go to that folder or create it, and then inside of that folder, create an empty repositories.cfg file. To create the file, just make a repositories.txt file and then rename it with the extension CFG. Another possible problem that could appear, typically in earlier versions of Unreal, but you still could get it in Unreal 5, is package called LLDB 3.1 could not be loaded. And the solution for that is to open the setup Android script with a text editor And to find this line of code, call SDK Manager, Platform Tools, Platforms Android 28, Build Tools LLDB, CMake NDK. And this can be slightly varied depending on your Build Tools version and your NDK version. But here you want to remove the LLDB line and leave all the other ones. So just remove that one piece of text, that one word, LLDB, semicolon 3.1. Those are the two potential issues you could get when running into the running of the Android NDK script. I experienced the first one with Unreal 5. The second one is typically with earlier versions of Unreal. But once you resolve those issues, then you'll be able to run the script with no problems. And make sure you have no error messages, that you have a success message, because that means you've successfully installed the NDK. And once you have, join me in our next lecture where we're going to continue. And next up, we have to now add the Android SDK, NDK, and JDK to our Unreal project. I will see you in the next lecture. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. Now that we have Android Studio installed and the Android NDK installed, we are going to set up the Android SDK, NDK, and JDK, or Java, inside of Unreal. So open up your Unreal project and we are going to get started. We're going to go into our settings and select Project Settings. And then here we are going to scroll down and we're going to go into Platforms and select Android SDK, because we are developing our project for an Android device. Okay, and here you'll notice I already have my directories filled in just because I have it saved from a previous project that I did. But for you, likely these three and even these two could be blank, okay? So you want to fill in the location of the Android SDK, location of the Android NDK, and the location of the Java JDK directory. You want to fill in with these three paths. Just replace the glitty here with your username. That's just my username. And you want to make sure you use these three paths because sometimes the Java document, or not the Java documentation, but sometimes the Unreal documentation can be a little bit outdated and they have the incorrect path here, or they tell you just to leave these blank. But if you put in an incorrect path or you leave it blank, when you launch the project, you'll often get a message that says could not find the location of the Android SDK, or could not find the location of the Android NDK, or could not find the location of Java. So I recommend using these three paths. Okay, let's talk about these paths. The first path goes to the location of your Android SDK from your hidden app data folder. And you can actually copy this path and actually go to it in your directory. Just remember, replace that users with your username. For example, here I just pasted in that path into my folder, and you can see it takes me to this path where I have my Android SDK. So you can also test out to make sure that that folder exists on your computer. Let's test also the NDK. For that, I'm going to go back into Unreal here, and I'm going to copy the path to my Android NDK, and you can also feel free to search for the path with these ellipses. Okay, now for this, again, make sure your username is your username instead of a glitty here, and also make sure that your NDK version actually exists. So if you don't have exactly version 21.4.7075529, then you have to change it to match your own. So you could also just copy this first path and then find it on your computer and then paste in what version of the NDK you have. For example, here I'll search up for my NDK, all right, and that's the same place as my SDK, but then it's just into the subfolder of the NDK. All right, and you can see I have these two versions of the Android NDK, and I'm using 21.4.7075529. Okay, that's because that is the newest one that I have. And you want to make sure you're using the exact version that is on your computer. It has to exist. You can't just put in a random value here. Also, the version of the NDK has to be compatible with the version of the SDK that you have. You can't have an SDK that is, for example, 100, but then NDK 1000 if those two are not compatible. Okay, and you can find exactly which are compatible on the Unreal site. For example, if you have Android Studio 4.0, the compatible NDK is 21. All right, so make sure you have NDK 21 if you're using Android Studio 4.0. If you're using a different Android Studio version, it has to be, number one, compatible with your Unreal version. You can't use Android Studio 1.0, for example, with Unreal Engine 5. You have to have the Android Studio version be compatible with your Unreal version, and then the NDK version has to be compatible with your Android Studio version. So make sure to check the Unreal site if you're using Android Studio other than 4.0. Okay, then finally we have the location of Java. Now sometimes the Unreal documentation can tell you to put in a different location to a JDK, but I found that caused me to have a message that said could not find location of Java. So instead, use program files /Android Studio /JRE. All right, and Java was installed with Android Studio. Okay, so we can copy this location and we can actually search for that location as well and just make sure it exists on your computer. If you can't find the JRE folder, then number one, you can try putting in the path to your JDK, but most likely that will not work. You need the JRE folder. So if you don't have a path to Java on your computer, then that means that you can manually install Java or reinstall Android Studio and make sure you have Java selected. Because when you install Android Studio, you should have Java installed with that. So sometimes there can be, of course, weird issues where Java was not installed with Android Studio. So just reinstall Android Studio with Java because you want to have this JRE folder. You need Java in order to run your Unreal project on an Android device. You need these three things: the Android SDK, Android NDK, and Java. You can't run the project without these. Now, you can use Turnkey if you have Turnkey enabled as of Unreal Engine 5. But if you don't have Turnkey set up with your organization, then you can just manually set up the Android SDK and NDK in Java. As well, we have the SDK API level and the NDK API level. We can just use those for latest. All right, so here we go. Note that choosing Android 21 or later won't run on pre-5.0 devices. And as well, you want to make sure that whichever SDK you use to package and compile Java, that you matches the NDK level. But if you use latest, then those will match. All right, so there we go. Now that is how we can set up Android SDK, NDK, and Java in Unreal. Our last step is going to be to actually plug in our phone and launch the application on the phone. Now, for this to work on your phone, you have to have your phone debugging mode on, and also often you have to change the USB configuration type to picture transfer. So we'll talk about how to set up your Android phone in our next lecture. And then once you have it set up and plugged into your computer, you'll actually be able to see it in the ellipses beside play. I just have it as a secondary play because I'm zoomed in. But here you'll actually have a quick launch enabled with also your phone plugged in. Okay, so you'll be able to launch on your device. So join me in our next lecture. We'll talk about what you need to set up your phone for testing out your Unreal project on that Android phone. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. We have nearly finished our project of building a simple augmented reality app with Unreal. And the last step is in this lecture is going to be to set up your phone to test the Unreal application. Because often it's not enough just to plug in your phone or connect it to your computer via Wi-Fi and then to press launch in Unreal on the phone. If this is your first time with testing out an Unreal project on your phone, then there are going to be several steps that you have to go through. And that's what we're going to talk about in this lecture. And we'll show you the result that you should get at the end. First, your phone's CPU must be ARM version 64. Unreal has discontinued support for anything less than that as of Unreal 5. So you have to make sure that your phone's CPU is 64, and I'll show you how to check that. If your phone's CPU is less than ARM 64, you can use an earlier version of Unreal to test out your project, but note that Unreal has discontinued support for anything less than ARM 64, meaning a phone that does have ARM 64, because that's the only one that will actually work to allow you to test your Unreal 5 project on that phone. So how do we check the phone's CPU? First, you want to download the free application called Droid Info to your actual phone. Then you want to open up that application, Droid Info, and go to the System tab and look at the section CPU Architecture under Processor. This will tell you which ARM version you have. Here in this example, this is ARM version 7, but you want to make sure that that says ARM version 64. Once you have verified that your phone is ARM 64, you can plug that phone into your computer to connect it to the computer. There's also the option to connect it via Wi-Fi, but plugging it into the computer is the easiest way to just connect it to the computer. The phone should now show up in Unreal in your Unreal project under the quick launch list. So you go to the three dots beside play, the ellipses. So you go to more for the play button, and that's instead of just selecting play right away. You click on those three dots beside play, and you'll notice you have several options for the modes, and as well you have options for quick launch. Before, there was only your computer under quick launch, but now you can actually select your device for quick launch. It will have appeared. Now, if your device doesn't show up, there are several different steps you can take to make sure that the device shows up. First, activate developer options on your phone. To do this, go to your phone and find the build number. This is located under settings in your settings application, under system, and then about, and under the category software info. You could also search for it. Okay, so once you've located the build number, you want to tap that build number repeatedly, typically 6 times, until the phone tells you that you are a developer, until the phone tells you that you have enabled developer options. So this is kind of like a secret knock in order to open the developer options. Now, if you go back to the system menu on your phone, you'll actually see this new property listed called developer options, and you can click on that to access the developer options. Here in developer options as well, you want to change your USB configuration type to PTP, Picture Transfer Protocol. By default, the USB configuration is charging, which means that when you connect your phone to the computer, you've just connected it for charging. But you want to change that to Picture Transfer Protocol, meaning you can transfer pictures and transfer, therefore, the camera source. You want to enable this so that way Unreal will actually be able to register your device. If you have it as charging as the configuration, this could be one of the reasons that Unreal doesn't recognize the device. So how do we change the USB configuration type exactly? Well, first go to your phone and under settings, just use the search bar to search for USB. And then you'll have different options. You want to click on Select USB Configuration. Notice that this is actually under Developer Options. All right, and there, select that, click on Select USB Configuration. By default, it will be typically charging, but you want to change it to PTP, Picture Transfer Protocol. Now note that if you replug the phone and you plug it back in, it often resets back to charging, so you have to set it back to Picture Transfer Protocol every time. For that reason, I do recommend keeping the phone awake just to make sure it's going to be on while it's charging. It won't go to sleep, because if it goes to sleep, you could also potentially have it go back to charging mode when it wakes up. So for that reason, I recommend keeping the phone awake. And to do that, just search for awake in your settings, and then notice that that's also under developer options. Search for awake and then click on stay awake and just turn that on, so the screen will never sleep while the phone is charging. Note that the phone can get quite hot if you leave it plugged in for a long time, so be wary of that if you leave it plugged in for a long time. As well, another step you want to take to make sure that the phone shows up in Unreal, your device shows up there, is to enable Android debugging on the phone. So this is also under developer options. Under the debugging category, you want to toggle on that Android debugging property. This will enable the Android Debug Bridge ADB interface. All right, and if it's still not showing up, if your device still does not appear under that list in Unreal, check your USB driver. So you want to search for the application device manager on your computer on Windows, and then right click on the device that appears, that matches your device, and update the driver for that device. And after you've completed all these different steps, you will see the phone in Unreal. If you still don't see the phone appearing in Unreal, do more searching for your exact problem for your exact phone as well. Search up that exact phone and use a search engine to type up why it might not be appearing. Because once you've done all of these steps, it should appear in Unreal. As well, every time you update your driver, you do want to restart your computer. And then your device will show up under the extension for the play button, and you can do a quick launch of the project on your app. Typically, it will just appear immediately on your phone. If it doesn't appear and open immediately on your phone, then you can search for it on your phone. It will be an Unreal application on your device. You don't have to package the project. You can just do a quick launch, but if you want to, you could also package it for your device. Okay, the result is going to be something like this, where you have your camera from your device, it's rendering your world, and then you're going to have the augmented reality project draw on top of that world. In this case, we just had a simple project where we're just detecting geometries, and we're going to be outlining them in the default yellow color. And this is called an AR core plane. All right, and you can move your camera around, and the camera will continuously have overlaid on top of the world any geometries that our Unreal project detects. So now you know the fundamentals to building out your own augmented reality project from scratch. This is just a basic example where we can quickly get up and running this AR project where we detect geometries, but of course augmented reality can do a lot more. You can place objects, you can build games and applications that implement augmented reality. But now you know how to work with augmented reality from the ground up and also how to test it out. Congratulations everyone on completing this project, and I will see you next time.